The novelist Martin Amis was asked if he had ever thought of writing a children's book. And he responded by saying, "The idea of being conscious of who you're directing the story to is anathema to me, because in my view, fiction is freedom and any restraints on that are intolerable." He added, "I would never write about someone that forced me to write at a lower register than what I can write." And John Doherty, the children's writer, apparently responded, "Don't worry, Martin, we can't all be imaginative and versatile." I think that perhaps secretly a lot of songwriters take a similar view as Martin Amis about writing songs for children. But I think they're wrong. Writing for children is not a lower standard. It often needs to be higher. It's not easier to do. It's harder. It's not less important. It's more so. Consider Jesus' comments about anyone who causes a little one to stumble being deserving of a millstone tied around their neck. Writing songs for children is a high calling and a hard task to get right. I think this is even more important because today in the contemporary church we struggle so much with all-age worship. It seems increasingly difficult to get adults and children in the same room worshipping together. Now, we need songs written specifically for children. We need things for praise parties, for children's services, children's congregations. We need songs that children can listen to at home on CD and really connect with, and they can connect with God and learn truths from the Bible from them. But I also think there's a desperate need for songs which are truly all age, connecting equally both with adults and children. A lot of people are talking about this at the moment. Nick and Becky Drake use the phrase worship for everyone, and they write on their website that songs can be written truly for everyone, young and old, families and individuals, every age and stage of life enjoying together. Big Ministries have the All-In thing, which is a resource to help all ages when everyone is in together, worship together. Whilst Krish Kandiah has blogged about age-integrated services. So the old divides, where it was assumed that children and adults had to be separated in order to worship, are being broken down, and new kinds of gatherings and songs are being imagined. The example that you might want to think about for this is the example of a Pixar film. Joe Squires from Big Ministries uses the illustration of when you try to choose a movie for the whole family. Now, the dad might really want to watch something like Schindler's List, but that's not really appropriate for the children, as they're not going to understand it, they're not going to connect with it, and it's kind of scary. The children, they might really want Barney the Purple Dinosaur, but again, that's not going to work with the parents. So if you choose something like Toy Story or Up or Wall-E, that's going to be enjoyed by everyone, but on different levels, both young and old. Or you might prefer to think of a book that's beloved by both children and their parents. Or maybe that CD that when you put it on, the whole family are really enjoying it all together. These creative media appeal on multiple levels. And that's my dream for all age songs. Songs which are understandable, which are engaging and instructive for both children and also for people who are older than that, drawing everyone in to worship together. Now, to achieve this, I think we might need to start to understand children a little better. And firstly, there's nothing more helpful than actually getting to know some kids that you're writing for. So for me, having children of my own was a real eye-opener to how kids worship, how kids engage with God. But it may be that you can, if you haven't got kids, you can get to know children in your church. But I also think that child development studies are really relevant to this, and particularly how faith develops in children as they grow. And the main expert in this area is a guy called James Fowler, who wrote a book called Stages of Faith. But if you want to read a slightly more accessible and perhaps evangelical version of this book, I would recommend Francis Bridges' book, Children Finding Faith. What these experts conclude is that faith is just as real at any stage of child development. But it's going to look different depending on the stage. So, for example, you don't expect a 5-year-old to be reading Shakespeare and eating blue cheese. Their literary abilities, their palate has not yet developed to appreciate these things. And yet, you still give them books, you still feed them food. It's just you give them something appropriate to their age. Similarly, I think we should feed our children a spiritual diet appropriate to the stage that they're at. And that's got to include the kind of songs that we're sharing with our children. So considerations, if you think about this idea of child development, firstly, found that children, particularly younger children, really don't do abstractions or conceptual thinking in the way that an adult does. A lot of adult songs use concepts, don't they? We say things like, God, you are love. They say things like, your righteousness knows no end, or my sin is great, but your grace is stronger. Well, these are abstract ways of thinking. They're concepts, and these are not going to connect with children. Young kids don't process concepts like this. Instead, they think in terms of their experience. They think of things that actually happen to them. So a phrase like, I do things wrong, but God always wants to be my friend again. That's not a concept. That's a concrete thing that can actually happen. Or, God, you look after me. That's going to connect with a child. Jesus never lets us down. These kind of statements are going to make sense to a child. Secondly, and relatedly, kids take things literally. We use a lot of metaphors in adult songs, but they need to be handled carefully. You say something like, Jesus is in my heart. And there's a story of a child who was drawing Jesus, and he said, well, he's covered in red blood because he's in my heart, so it must be, quite messy in there. They don't understand that that's a metaphor. We might say, you need to be born again. Well, what does that mean? Do they think that they have to go back inside their mum's tum and literally be born again? Now, it doesn't mean we can't use any metaphors, but we just need to be careful with them. We need to unpack them. Perhaps an extended metaphor over the entire length of a song would be more helpful, or perhaps we need to use it more like a simile and say God is like this, so that it's really clear to a child what it is that we mean. Also, be aware of negative connotations in a metaphor that you're using. We might say something like, Jesus will return like a thief in the night. That's a good biblical metaphor. But actually, a thief, that's not a positive thing in a child's mind. That might sound scary to them, thinking, Jesus is some sort of cat burglar. So let's be really aware of the connotations of the metaphors that we use. Another point is to avoid jargon and cliche. Now, I would say this is true with adults as well as children, but it's particularly true with children because often kids will parrot something that they've heard. They'll respond it back to you, but they won't necessarily understand it. The other thing that I found is that children in adult songs, often we might find it hard to put ordinary language. We struggle to talk about things like money or the places we live or our work or our schools. That sometimes that language just seems a bit odd in an adult song. But for some reason, in a song aimed at children, there's a bit more freedom to be a bit more literalistic with our language. So the example I think is really strong is that Nigel Hemming talked in the interview that I did with him about his song Great Big God and how initially he had the line, it's higher than the mountains and deeper than the deep blue sea. And his wife said, that's a bit weak. Why don't you say higher than a skyscraper, deeper than a submarine? And Nigel thought, well, that's a bit odd. How can you talk about skyscrapers and submarines in worship songs? And he played it to loads of people and they said, yep, that's the line you should use. For some reason, that language, which is very earthy and concrete, works when you say that a child is going to sing it. Somehow there's the permission to use some of that more literal language. So you might want to think about the kind of language you use and maybe expanding the kinds of terms that you use in a song aimed for children. When you're thinking about what should I write, I would really encourage you to look for the gap themes. there are so many themes which haven't yet been done or done well in songs for children and all ages. I often notice that Great Big God is a fantastic song, but there's been lots and lots of songs after that have also made this point that God, you are so big. You're big, big, big. You're big, big. How big you are. God, you're big. And I sometimes wonder, okay, that's fine, but can we move on? Can we say something else about God? So an example might be, how would you get across an aspect of the cross in a way that a child would understand? How can we talk about sacrifice, forgiveness, obedience in that context in a way that everyone might understand? Or think about care of creation. It's quite easy to put language of creation into a song for children. We've got all those songs about if I was a butterfly and a fuzzy bear, and that's maybe sounds even a bit hackneyed. But what about, I think kids are often quite concerned. My daughter walks around and says, why has someone dropped that rubbish on the floor? Why is somebody polluting the environment? So what about a song that kids understand about the fact that God has made the world, he's given it to us as a gift, and yet, we're not treating it well, and we ought to. The last thing on lyrics is to consider the fact that children often learn by doing. Children are kinesthetic learners, as are many adults. But most kids will learn not just by hearing something or talking about something, but by actually acting it out, by actually doing something. And that's one of the reasons why people use actions in a song, or movements, or dances, or even sign language, is partly because children can't always read. If they're young, maybe they read quite slowly. So actually getting them doing something is in a way of involving them in the song before they can even read. But also the movement, it's part of our human nature that when we do something, we remember it better, we engage with it on a different level. So you might want to think, can I write a song that actually implies movements or actions in the lyrics? In the interview that I did with Damien from Big Ministries, he talked about the song Words Are Not Enough, which says, God, I can't just worship you with my words, so please understand what I mean when I jump, or when I clap, or when I dance. They also wrote the song I Will Stomp, which has a whole list of different actions and says every action is a special blessing, is a way of showing that I love God. And also, I wrote a song called I Will Lift My Hands, which is just basically explaining really to kids in all ages why we do some of the things we do. So I will lift my hands to say I love you, for you are good to me. And then it talks about other things. I will raise my voice and shout, I love you, Jesus. I will close my eyes and think about you. We will join our hands as all your children, for you are good to us. So in that song, what I was trying to say was, let's do these things and let's think about why we're doing them. And so the actions aren't just an add-on to kind of amuse kids, but actually they're integral to the way that your song has been written. If we move on to thinking about the music of songs for children and all ages, the first thing I would say is keep it simple. Avoid too many sections. This is, again, something that is true of a lot of songs, but particularly if you want a child to grab hold of it, avoid too many sections. I think often kids don't struggle with syncopation in the way that some adults do. If it's a kind of speech melody, I think they're used to hearing that in pop songs. It's around them all the time. So don't worry too much about having songs that are kind of four square like a hymn. But I would avoid overly complex music. I would avoid too wide a range. Often some of the modern songs are quite high and you really suit a kind of adult tenor voice. Don't really work for children. And think about repetition. Again, back to the song Great Big God, that repeats the first line pretty much 3 times in every chorus. And people catch onto that so quickly. They get that, they're confident with it. You also might want to consider call and response. Again, the fact is that a lot of children either can't read or don't read the screen as quickly as an adult does. So something that I realised when I was running a children's service is that if we did a call and response song, like the song I Will Worship, for example, I could sing a line, they would immediately sing it back to me. They felt like they had a part to play in the song because I was kind of leading and they were responding. So I wrote a couple of songs based on that idea. One went, God, you've given. Everyone responds, God, you've given so much to me, so much to me. I don't want to, I don't want to. And so on. And the lines kind of overlap a little bit, but it seemed to work. The fact that I was calling out the line, everybody else was kind of echoing that back, and people could really quickly pick that song up. The next thing I would say about music is what is one of the great freeing things about kids and all age songs is it takes some of the limits off of musical style. You know, some of my kids' favourite songs are from a really broad range of musical styles. They like things that are a bit more out there, a bit more extreme. And sometimes people criticise contemporary worship and say, oh, it all sounds the same. It's all got the same kind of chords, the same kind of grooves. Well, maybe this is an excuse and an opportunity to use a broader range of music. So some of the music that my kids like, they like a song called 66 Books, which is on a Spring Harvest Kids album. And it's got this kind of 70s glam rock stomp kind of style. It's kind of out there, but they love it. They kind of pick up on the extremeness of it and the fun of it. Or the big ministry song I mentioned before, I Will Stomp. It's got this very kind of dumb chick kind of country. It's just fun. I guess it's kind of relates to some of the other kind of things that are popular right now. But kids pick up on that stuff really quickly. And in an all-age setting, it becomes fun. It becomes a kind of family party style. So I would encourage you to listen widely, listen to what children are listening to, and to not just write in that kind of narrow contemporary worship bubble. I also want to add that I don't think these songs need to necessarily be happy or jolly or, in a major key even. Joe Squires was interviewing Ishmael once, and she said, well, what are some of the things that we should do with children's songs? And apparently he said, well, you should try and write them in a major key. And she pointed out to him, hang on a minute, Father God, I Wonder is one of your most famous songs. It's sung all over the world. Father God, I Wonder is in a very minor, it's E minor, it's a very minor feel to the whole song. And yet actually lots of people connect with that, young and old. And so I wouldn't limit the kind of musical tone and the emotions of the songs that you write. Actually, kids can connect with a song that is a bit more minor, is a bit more somber. They don't necessarily have to have everything fast and major and happy clappy. Finally, a thought if you're going to write an all-age song about how to continue to keep adults engaged. I would say, firstly, avoid overly childish language. If it sounds too preschoolish, if it sounds too silly, as Damien was saying in the interview, if it uses some of those kind of kids slang phrases that actually adults feel I feel a bit silly saying this. Actually, that's probably not going to work as an all-age song. It might be fine as a preschool song or a children's song, but as an all-age song, just think about the language you're using and whether it's a bit cringeworthy for an adult. Also, music that is a bit patronising. I talked about using a range of styles, but if you use a real kind of pastiche, bad blues or a bad reggae, again, adults will probably find that a bit cringeworthy. Something that's just too irritating, too repeated, the kind of crazy frog of the worship song world is probably not going to work. And I think finally, you want to have some sort of depth of meaning to the lyrics. It doesn't mean that it has to be super complicated, but actually to add something kind of theological, something biblical, or maybe something which is relating to, life isn't always good. Sometimes there are bad things. Actually, adults can connect in with some of those things. And again, it's that Pixar effect. There is a way of writing a song that hits both levels, that is engaging, understandable for children, but also has some depth, so that adults think, actually, this is a meaningful song. I'm singing something that is actually helping me as well. So I'd encourage you to have a go, to get to know some children, to road test your songs in all age settings, to get feedback on them, and to do all you can to write songs that will bless and encourage and build up the whole church.